going to be talking this morning on the health segment about peptic ulcer. Peptic ulcer is something that plagues quite a lot of people, and we're going to find out all about it, what exactly causes peptic ulcer, and how to manage it, how to deal with it. Well, we've been joined by, I must admit, one of my favorite human beings, Dr. Kelvin Owusu. He's right here with us. He's the head of occupational health and wellness at the Claron Health International. Dr. Owusu.
David. Good morning.
Bonjour, bonjour.
Why don't you change the gear this morning? Bonjour, bonjour.
Hey, bonjour, respond.
Ça va?
No, ça va bien, merci. Our French hostess is here.
Yes. I don't know where she disappeared to, but it's good to have you back.
Oh, thank you. It was my week off. Yes,
okay.
yeah.
That explains it.
Yes. How are you?
I'm okay. I don't have a peptic ulcer, so I'm happy.
Yeah, neither do I, actually.
That's shame. You're shaming a lot of us right now. But before we get into the conversation, is there a difference between peptic ulcer and ulcer?
So when you say ulcer, medically, ulcer is just a break in the skin or a break in a membrane, right? So you can have an ulcer on your skin, you can have an ulcer in any part of your intestine. You can have an ulcer anywhere pretty much. Peptic ulcer specifically refers to an ulcer along the esophagus, stomach, and duodenum. So that's usually what refers to peptic ulcer. The name peptic is actually refers to acid.
Oh.
So because of the relationship to acid, that's why it has that name. But generally, when you just say I have an ulcer, everybody naturally, gravitates towards the peptic ulcer.
Right.
Because we call the skin ulcer, we call it a sore. So nobody really calls it an ulcer, except you are on ward rounds. Very, very frustrating ward rounds.
Yeah. So would I be accurate in asserting that peptic ulcer takes its name from the action caused by peptic acid?
In a way.
Okay.
In a way.
Now,
So
what is peptic acid? You have me so confused. Like, now you've been reading your science.
Oh no, it's what we did in school. Yeah.
The stomach is a very, very interesting environment, you see, because there are literally things in the stomach that can kill you. Can literally eat the stomach from the inside out. So there needs to be a lot of balance in that stomach area, you see, because there are enzymes in the stomach that are digesting proteins. Now, what's the stomach made up of? Proteins. So it means that the enzymes that are in the stomach can actually digest the stomach itself. So that's the first thing. Now, there's also acid. And the acid that's in the stomach is actually very strong acid. In fact, if you were to put a metal inside the acid, it would corrode over time and literally be dissolved eventually. So that's how strong the acid in the stomach is. It's very, very strong acid, And so there needs to be some way to prevent these things, the acid and those enzymes, from actually making contact with the stomach lining, you see. And this is where the balance is. There's a thick mucus layer, which is secreted by the cells of the stomach. Again, of course, and then these cells again are secreting the acid. So that's why I started by saying that it's a very interesting environment in there. So this mucus layer prevents contact, from the acid and the enzymes having direct contact with the cells of the stomach. So that's one of the mechanisms that the stomach puts in place to protect itself.
Right.
Obviously, this system can fail sometimes, either through genetic issues, which we'll talk about later, or through environments or our own actions and habits. It can cause an imbalance in this system such that now the acid is making contact with the lining of the stomach.
Yeah.
And that's, causes ulcers or aggravates ulcers. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
So that's how interesting that combination is.
So I mean, of course, we're looking at some images here. What is exactly are we seeing?
So these images are trying to show you the various locations of the ulcers, the peptic ulcers. So you have two broad groups. There are the stomach ulcers, and then there are the duodenal ulcers.
Okay.
Now the stomach is the stomach. I mean, you can see the sac-like part of the intestine where when you eat food, that's where it settles, and the actions of the stomach mixes the food with the enzymes and the acid. The acid actually plays a role. It kills bacteria. It's meant to protect you from any invasion from the mouth.
Okay.
So bacteria, any foreign material, the acid actually cleanses the food. So it needs to mix properly so that it can actually kill or do its job.
Okay.
You know, and while it's doing that, it's also mixing the enzymes with the food, and then the digestion process can begin. And so an ulcer can form in the stomach. And an ulcer can also form in the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. Right from the stomach opens into the duodenum.
Right.
And that area too can have some ulcers developing there as well. Now, classically, I say classically because we hardly see these symptoms, but classically, the symptoms of a duodenal ulcer are very different from those of a stomach ulcer. Generally, because the acid is produced in the stomach, the irritation of a stomach ulcer is pretty much always there because the acid is always irritating that ulcer. But when food enters the stomach, the food sort of dilutes the acid. So stomach ulcers, classically, the pain is reduced when you eat.
Okay.
So those stomach ulcers tend to actually eat a lot. And so, yes, and
A
so
lot. I have one in my house. My brother, he eats a lot.
and so they actually tend to come into the hospital a bit overweight because they compensate by eating. You know, because once they eat, the food reduces the acid concentration.
And
it gives them
brings
some relief.
relief.
But duodenal ulcer is the opposite because the duodenum doesn't have any acid there usually.
Right.
Okay.
It only receives the acid when the stomach opens up.
Ah.
You know, so once it opens up, then the irritation begins. So their
Okay.
pain tends to begin
After
eating.
eating.
So then they avoid food. So then they come in having lost
Slim.
weight.
Yeah.
You know, but I say classically because we hardly get these classic symptoms.
Right.
You know, but you know, if you're writing an exam, this is how you'd actually write the essay so that you pass.
Right. So does GERD have any relation? Is it GERD or GERD? Does it have any relationship with peptic ulcers?
So that's gastroesophageal reflux
Yeah.
disease. It does. You see, because it's a spectrum. So let's start from it's a spectrum. Basically, GERD is an issue with the esophagus where the acid that is meant to stay in the stomach, it regurgitates up the esophagus. Now the esophagus is not it's not customized for acid. So once the acid goes up there, it irritates that area, and then you get the inflammation, and that's what we call heartburn. You know, so typically you finish eating and then you go and lie down flat, you'd have some reflux, you know, going up there. So it's a spectrum. So GERD, gastritis, gastric ulcers, peptic ulcers, it's a spectrum, and the treatment is similar, you know. But of course, there are peculiar diseases or the peculiar conditions that can cause GERD, and so sometimes you have to treat those specific disease conditions to get to the bottom of the problem.
So, and does HP pylori also equals that?
So remember when I mentioned the acid cause, I had to quickly change it to aggravate. So there are two causes. When we talk about cause of ulcers, there are two established causes of ulcers. The first one is H. pylori. H. pylori, that's Helicobacter pylori. It's a bacteria, and it's actually one of the most common bacteria around. Data suggests that up to 50% of the world's population are infected with H. pylori, but not everybody has symptoms of an ulcer. You know, because and this is where the attitudes and habits come in. So H. pylori is a bacteria, and it's you get the infection through orophycal means, which means that if you don't treat your poop, or if you're living in an overcrowded area, the risk of contracting it is high. So that's how most people get infected. Now this H. pylori disrupts the mucus lining I spoke about earlier. It's for a lot of people, it's actually considered normal flora. Right. Normal flora means that you have they stay in the stomach, they don't cause problems. But when they overgrow, then they start causing problems. For a lot of people, they are normal flora. But sometimes it gets triggered, and then they begin to break down the mucus protection. The mucus is supposed to prevent the acid from making contact with the stomach lining. So this H. pylori breaks down that protection, and then the acid now gets direct access to the stomach lining. And I've already established that the acid is very strong acid. It can dissolve metal. So imagine if it can dissolve metal, then your cells are no match for it. Exactly. Yeah. You know, so that's H. pylori has been established as a cause of peptic ulcer. The second one is NSAIDs. That's non-steroidal anti-inflammatory disease. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Sorry, not disease, drugs. Now, these are a class of pain medication, such as diclo, brufen or ibuprofen. You know, and all its cousins, naproxen.
Don't tell me paracetamol is someone.
Paracetamol is not, thankfully. But these are, I mean, from the names, these are very, very common pain medications that everybody takes, especially women, because it tends to help with cramps as well.
Cramps.
Yes. And these medication, this category of medication also disrupts certain aspects of the protection. There are other, so mucus is one. There's another, there are some chemicals called prostaglandins that these NSAIDs would disrupt. So basically, it takes away the protection and then allows the acid to do its damage. So these two have been established. Everything else is an association. So people who indulge in certain practices are more at risk of developing ulcer, or people with certain family history. So if there's a family history of ulcer, there's a risk that you can develop ulcer as well. There are some people who have liver diseases that put them at risk of developing ulcer, you know, in line with these two causes. So if you have the H. pylori infection and you are taking NSAIDs, and you also happen to have a family history, your risk is higher. If you also happen to drink alcohol, your risk is higher. Alcohol also predisposes you to development of an ulcer. You know, if you work in a high pressure environment, your risk is higher. You know, because the stress hormones sort of also disrupt some of these protective mechanisms and can predispose you to development of an ulcer. There are so many associations when it comes to development of ulcer.
So, can ulcers be avoided in a person's lifetime?
That's a very difficult question to answer.
Do you have ulcer?
No.
So yeah, you've avoided it for a very long
Well,
time.
no, but I have a whole lot more years to go, hopefully. So
You do actually.
I mean, so every disease can be avoided to an extent. I mean, like I'm saying, if you avoid taking the NSAIDs, for instance, and you are keeping your surroundings clean, you're not eating with contaminated fingers, your risk of catching the H. pylori is also minimal. You know, if you don't have a high pressure job, or you are not smoking or drinking alcohol, you never develop a liver disease, your risk will obviously remain low. You know, but it's one of those diseases.
Liver disease, you said.
Yes.
So the liver disease can also
can also predispose you to development of an ulcer. Yes, because the liver also plays a key. You see, the liver is pretty much really a part of the digestive system. It's the first point of call for everything from the digestive system. Everything goes to the liver, and the liver processes these things and then sends it off, and then also gives feedback to the digestive system. So the liver is closely related. So anything that goes wrong with the liver, you can't experience it in the digestive system. In fact, for some disease conditions, you notice the changes in the digestive system before you actually you are prompted to test the liver. Because that's how, you know, that's the feedback mechanism that is, you know, available for you.
Right. So now talking about the medications, for me, I think the medications are really expensive. So it's no, like, okay, for example, I don't know if I can mention it, like Nexium. Nexium today is like very expensive. So like,
I mean, this is more of this is not a medical question, to be honest, because the cost of everything now is very high. And unfortunately, because the medication cost is a bit high, as you rightly said, people hardly complete their dosing regimen.
Yes.
And it causes a major challenge, you see, because we call something triple therapy. The treatment of ulcer requires a triple approach. One, we need to control the acid level. We need to try and bring it down a bit, you know, because the acid will continue to irritate the sore, and that sore will be difficult to heal because the irritation is ongoing. That once you eat, the acid is. In fact, once you smell food, your body begins to produce acid.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm going to actually let me touch on this before I forget. Which is why people. So you mentioned avoiding. If you do, one of the practices that we do that actually predisposes us to developing ulcers is chewing gum, especially on an empty stomach. It's because once your jaw starts moving, you are sending signals to your stomach that there's something coming in.
Yeah.
And the acid is there to protect you from infection. So the acid will start coming out before the food even arrives. But now in this case, the food never arrives because you are chewing gum.
So that means if you're chewing gum, be ready to eat.
Well, you can chew gum after eating because then there's already food there. But if you chew gum on an empty stomach, you are predisposing yourself to the development of an ulcer. Because eventually, it doesn't matter how much mucus you have, it will be broken down by the constant attack by the acid. Because the acid has nothing else to do. So they will eventually break down the protection and then you develop an ulcer. So it's something that you don't want to do at all. But I was talking about the triple therapy. So on one leg, you are trying to reduce the acid production or acid intensity. So that's one leg of the triple therapy. The second leg, you are trying to attack the bacteria itself. You see. And so every part of this triple therapy is important. The triple therapy, so is the acid and then 2 antibiotics to try and attack the bacteria, to try and avoid resistance. So you have to use 2 antibiotics. Unfortunately, many people just walk into pharmacy and they just buy anything. anything, and they just start taking it. So by the time they come to the hospital, they've misused so many combinations. So that itself is a challenge, and we are experiencing some form of resistance in that respect. You see, so we need to complete our dosing. Now, the next thing we mentioned, the group of medications that we call proton pump inhibitors.
Yeah.
And you need to be on them for at least 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how many people are actually staying on them for the 6 weeks? You see, if you don't complete your dosing, the likelihood that the treatment will fail is very high. You see, and
did you say 6 weeks?
Yes.
Okay.
That's like. You see.
No, I finished like a pack and a half. I don't know if it was 6 weeks, like a month plus.
Plus 2
Jeez,
weeks, yes.
That's a lot.
Yes.
I need to come see you.
You see, so it's important that we complete our dosing regimen, because if the first phase, if the first one fails, then we have to go to a quadruple therapy, and so it keeps increasing.
Oh, it keeps increasing.
Exactly. You see, so we have to try and finish the dosing as much as possible. So and that's why I said that it's more of a policy decision than a medical decision, because the knowledge on what to do, we have it. The prescription is duly written. Now, is the prescription being carried through? I have people in the past who you'd write for them to go and take the thing for, let's say, every day for a month, and they'll go and buy for 2 weeks, and then they'll take it every other day. And they'll come back with continuous ulcer, you see. And it's a problem. It's because the stomach lining is only so thick. Eventually, the acid is going to eat through the entire lining, and that presents one of the most should I say emergent, is that good English, situation you can ever find yourself. Imagine acid from the stomach spilling into the entire abdomen. Now that is an emergency, and it will kill you if you don't get to the hospital in time. In fact, between arrival at the hospital and getting to the theater table is less than an hour. That's how fast it is, even in our setting here in Ghana. That's how fast we move. So it's an emergency, you see. So the ulcer that everybody seems to have and everybody is disrespecting could actually kill you.
Yeah.
It could kill you.
Where we just walk into the pharmacy and just pick up something.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very, very dangerous disease condition, you see.
All right, thank you very much. Just some basic, are there home care tips?
So, I mean, when you do have an ulcer, you know yourself, there are some foods that can irritate the ulcer some more. You know, like spicy foods, you know, it can irritate the ulcer some more. Oranges can actually irritate because orange has a citric acid. So the fruits in that range, tangerine, orange, lime, they need to be avoided. You know, anything with a high acid content needs to be avoided when the ulcer is active. But I must add that just like any other infection, it is treatable. So you shouldn't walk about with your ulcer, as they say. It's treatable, and you can eliminate an ulcer.
True.
I had an ulcer in secondary school. I don't have an ulcer anymore. You see, so it is treatable.
Wow, that's the part people don't know. That's the part people don't know. Yeah.
People have actually personalized the disease. So they, my ulcer. You know, so it's treatable.
All right. So, Dr. Kelvin, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm quite active on social media, Kelvin also MD on all channels, so you can drop your question. You can also follow our clinic page as well, Claron Health International, and we'll definitely attend to you.
All right, thank you. We've been speaking with Dr. Kelvin Owusu, who is the head of Occupational Health and Wellness at Claron Health International.